Queen Scifi sat on her massive throne, surrounded by shimmering holograms displaying the latest war reports. Her scaled fingers tapped against the armrest as she listened to her general speak. The great Zereth Dominion had conquered countless worlds, crushing every species that dared resist. Now, only one remained, a small, insignificant race called humans. "They refuse to surrender, my queen," General Salvik said, his voice filled with irritation. "Even after we destroy their colonies, they continue to fight. Their warships are weak, their technology outdated, yet they resist." A deep, hissing laugh escaped Queen Xyrethis. "How amusing," she said. "Do these creatures truly believe they stand a chance against us? We have crushed empires far greater than theirs. Their weapons are nothing more than toys. Their soldiers? Mere insects." The other Zereth warriors in the chamber chuckled, their armored bodies gleaming under the dim purple lights of the war room. To them, the war against humanity was already over. It was only a matter of time before the last remnants of the Terran forces were wiped out. A new hologram flickered to life in the center of the room, showing a distant battlefield in deep space. Human ships, small and fragile compared to the Dominion's warcruisers, were locked in a desperate fight. Laser fire lit up the darkness, and explosions sent debris spinning through the void. Xyrethis leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. She had expected the humans to run, to beg for mercy. Instead, they fought with a strange, reckless determination. They did not retreat, even when their ships were torn apart. "Strange," she murmured. "Most species flee when faced with death. Why do they continue to resist?" "They are desperate, my queen," General Salvik said. "A dying species fighting a war they cannot win." Xyrethis smirked. "Then let us end this farce. Deploy the death claws. Let them see what true warriors look like." A murmur of approval swept through the chamber. The death claws were the Dominion's most elite warriors, genetically enhanced, towering beasts clad in bioarmor. No enemy had ever stood against them and lived. As the order was given, massive Zereth warships broke through hyperspace, descending upon a human-controlled planet. The sky burned with streaks of fire as the Dominion's forces prepared for their final assault. On the surface of the planet, in the ruins of a once great city, human soldiers braced themselves. Commander Elias Grant stood among them, his face grim but determined. He had seen the reports. He knew what was coming. But he also knew one thing the aliens did not: humanity never surrenders. High above, Queen Scifi watched the battlefield unfold, confident in her victory. She did not realize that she was about to witness something that would change everything she believed about humans, something that would make her question her own strength. The sky above the ruined city burned red as Zereth warships descended. Their massive, insect-like hulls blotted out the sun, casting long shadows over the battered streets. The air rumbled with the hum of their engines, and then, without warning, the bombardment began. Bright streaks of energy rained down, shattering buildings and turning metal into molten slag. The ground trembled with each explosion. Dust and smoke choked the air, but the human soldiers did not break. They crouched behind makeshift barricades, gripping their weapons tightly. Their faces were dirty, their uniforms torn, but their eyes were sharp with determination. Commander Elias Grant stood at the front lines, his rifle slung across his back. He watched the enemy descend, calm and unshaken. Around him, his soldiers prepared for battle. "They think we'll run," Grant muttered. Sergeant Lewis, standing beside him, smirked. "Let's prove them wrong, sir." Across the battlefield, the Zereth Deathclaws emerged from the landing craft. They were monstrous creatures, twice the height of a human, covered in thick bioarmor. Their glowing yellow eyes scanned the ruins with cold precision. Each warrior carried a blade forged from their own bone, sharp enough to cut through steel. The Queen's voice echoed through the communications network, her tone filled with amusement. "Crush them. Show them the power of the Dominion." The Death Claws charged. They moved with terrifying speed, leaping over rubble and darting through smoke. Their claws gleamed as they slashed through walls, eager to reach their prey. But the humans did not run. Instead, they fought back. The first wave of Zirith warriors met a wall of bullets. Human snipers, hidden among the ruins, picked off the leading creatures one by one. Explosives buried beneath the ground erupted, sending the aliens flying through the air. The streets became a maze of traps. Every alley, every collapsed building, a deadly ambush waiting to happen. The Death Claws, despite their strength, faltered. They had never faced an enemy like this before, one that did not fight with brute force, but with intelligence, strategy, and pure grit. Commander Grant raised his rifle and fired. The shot hit a Death Claw square in the eye, dropping it instantly. He reloaded without hesitation, his movements quick and precise. The Zirith forces, watching from above, were shocked. "My queen," General Salvik said, his voice uncertain. "The humans, they are holding the line." Queen Sirathis narrowed her eyes, her amusement fading. This was unexpected. Every species before had fallen under the might of the Dominion's warriors. None had lasted this long. "These creatures are stubborn," she muttered, "but it does not matter. They are only delaying the inevitable." Below, the battle raged on. A squad of human soldiers rushed forward, launching grenades into the enemy's ranks. Smoke and fire filled the air, and the roars of dying Zirith warriors echoed through the ruins. Sergeant Lewis grinned as he fired at an approaching Death Claw. "They're not as invincible as they think." But the battle was far from over. More Zirith warships loomed above, preparing to unleash another wave of destruction. The Death Claws, though struggling, pushed forward with renewed fury. Commander Grant glanced up at the sky. He could see the enemy's reinforcements arriving. Time was running out. He activated his communicator. "All units, fall back to Sector 3. We'll make our stand there." The humans retreated in an organized manner, luring the enemy deeper into the city. The Zirith forces, believing their prey was finally breaking, pursued without hesitation. What they didn't realize was that they were walking into a trap. Grant gave a small, grim smile. "Let them come. Let them see what happens when you underestimate humanity." The ruined city trembled as the battle raged on. Smoke filled the air, and the scent of burning metal and scorched earth was thick. The Zirith Death Claws, towering and armored, stormed forward, believing victory was within reach. They had pushed the humans back, just as expected. But Commander Elias Grant had not retreated out of fear. He had led them into a trap. The human forces had fallen back to Sector 3, a dense section of the city where the buildings still stood tall. Narrow streets, collapsed roads, and broken bridges created a maze, a battlefield where sheer strength mattered less than strategy. Sergeant Lewis crouched behind a pile of rubble, watching the Death Claws rush in. His voice crackled over the radio. "They took the bait, sir." Grant stood on the second floor of a ruined building, sniper rifle in hand. Through his scope, he saw the enemy move in tight formations, confident in their overwhelming strength. They expected the fight to be over soon. Grant smirked. "Good. Let's teach them why they're wrong." He raised his hand and signaled. The trap was sprung. The moment the Zirith warriors entered the tight corridors of Sector 3, hidden explosives detonated. Boom! The ground beneath them shattered, sending fire and debris into the air. Entire squads of Death Claws were thrown back, their armor cracked, their roars of pain filling the air. From the rooftops and hidden tunnels, human soldiers unleashed a coordinated assault. Snipers took precision shots. Machine guns rattled, tearing into enemy ranks. Grenades and makeshift weapons turned the battlefield into a nightmare for the invaders. The Zirith, for the first time, hesitated. Their commanders, watching from above, could not believe what was happening. "My queen." General Salvik's voice was uncertain. "The humans, they fight with unnatural persistence. They should have been crushed by now." Queen Sirathis sat on her throne, eyes narrowed as she watched the battle unfold through a holographic display. She had expected resistance, yes, but this was something else entirely. She leaned forward. They are no different from the others we have conquered. They only delay the inevitable. But as she spoke, she saw something unsettling. The humans fought with a different kind of strength. Not brute force, not superior weapons, but sheer unbreakable willpower. Even when wounded, they kept fighting. Even when outnumbered, they refused to surrender. One of her Death Claw commanders, a hulking warrior named Varric, stormed through the wreckage, cutting down human soldiers with his massive blade. He roared in frustration. Why won't they fall? Just as he shouted, a grenade exploded at his feet, sending him crashing into a building. Before he could rise, a squad of human soldiers surrounded him, their weapons aimed. Sergeant Lewis stepped forward, his rifle steady. Because we're not like the others. Varric snarled, preparing to charge, but the humans fired first. He fell, another elite warrior defeated. Grant watched from above, listening to the reports coming in. The trap was working. The Zirith, despite their numbers, were struggling. A voice crackled over his radio. "Commander, we've held them off, but more reinforcements are coming." Grant nodded. He knew this wasn't over. But they had done something no one else had. They had made the invincible warriors of the Dominion bleed. The Queen, watching the battle unfold, felt something strange deep in her chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't amusement. It was the first hint of doubt. For the first time, she asked herself, what if we were wrong about the humans? The command chamber of the Zirith Dominion's flagship was silent. Every general, every high-ranking officer, and every strategist in the room watched the battle unfold with growing unease. The humans were not breaking. Queen Sirathis sat on her throne, her golden eyes locked onto the holographic display before her. The mighty Death Claws, her finest warriors, were falling. The battlefield was littered with their bodies, cut down by the stubborn, relentless humans. A deep growl rumbled in her throat. This was not how things were supposed to happen. "My queen," General Xalvik spoke carefully, his voice hesitant. "The humans have resisted longer than expected." Sirathis turned her sharp gaze toward him. "Longer than expected," she repeated, her voice dangerously calm. Xalvik straightened, his mandibles clicking nervously. "Yes, my queen. Their tactics are unpredictable. They use the ruins as cover, setting traps, attacking from hidden positions. Our warriors are powerful, but they are being outmaneuvered." A flicker of anger crossed Sirathis' face. She had thought humans were weak, fragile, inferior. But now, watching them fight, she saw something else, something that unnerved her. They fought as if they had nothing to lose. They fought as if the universe itself had challenged them, and they had decided to fight back instead of submitting. For the first time, Queen Sirathis felt something strange in her chest. Was this respect? No, impossible. She rose from her throne, her tall, armored figure casting a long shadow across the chamber. Her voice was sharp, filled with authority. "If my generals cannot break them," she declared, "then I will." Gasps filled the room. The Queen never stepped onto the battlefield herself. She didn't need to. The Dominion had always won without her direct involvement. But this was different. The humans had embarrassed the mighty Zirith Dominion. That could not be allowed to continue. Sirathis donned her battle armor, a sleek, black exosuit that enhanced her already formidable strength. She was taller than most of her warriors, faster, stronger, more ruthless. She had never lost a fight. She didn't intend to start now. With a powerful stride, she entered the warship's hangar and stepped onto her personal drop pod. She was going to end this herself. The battlefield. Moments later, the sky split open as a massive Zirith warship descended, its engines roaring like an angry storm. Every human soldier on the ground looked up, shielding their eyes. Commander Elias Grant watched the colossal ship hover above the ruins. His jaw tightened. "That's not good," he muttered. Sergeant Lewis stood beside him, gripping his rifle. "More reinforcements." Grant shook his head. "No, something worse." Then, like a falling star, a massive drop pod shot down from the ship, slamming into the ground with enough force to shake the earth. Dust and debris flew into the air. A deep, eerie silence followed. And then, the pod opened. From within the metallic shell, she emerged. Queen Scifi stepped onto the battlefield, her armor gleaming under the red sky. Her piercing golden eyes scanned the ruins, filled with cold determination. She had come to end this herself. The battlefield seemed to pause. Even the death claws, fierce and unstoppable, bowed their heads in respect. The queen raised her blade, an enormous curved weapon humming with energy. Her voice echoed across the ruins, filled with authority and challenge. "Which of you dares to stand against me?" Silence. Then, from the shadows of a crumbling building, Commander Grant stepped forward. His face was bruised, his uniform torn, but his eyes burned with unyielding defiance. He tightened his grip on his rifle, standing tall despite the overwhelming presence before him. And then, with a calm, fearless voice, he answered. A heavy silence settled over the battlefield. Smoke drifted through the ruins, and the distant sounds of battle faded as every soldier, human and Zurath alike, turned to watch. Commander Elias Grant stood firm, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his stance unshaken. Queen Scifi faced him, towering in her black exosuit, her golden eyes burning with challenge. The queen had fought many battles. She had crushed the greatest warriors of 100 worlds. No one had ever dared to stand against her alone. Yet here was a human, a species she had mocked, a species her empire had deemed weak, who dared to challenge her. A slow smirk formed on her lips. "Brave," she said, her voice cold, "but foolish." Commander Grant didn't flinch. He simply cracked his knuckles and replied, "We'll see." The wind howled through the ruins as the two warriors stared each other down. Then, in a blur of motion, Scifi attacked. She moved fast, unnaturally fast for her size, her massive energy blade swinging in a deadly arc. The air crackled as the weapon slashed toward Grant, but he was already moving, ducking, rolling, dodging. The blade sliced through a ruined wall, cutting through stone and steel like paper. Grant came up on one knee, raising his rifle. Bang! A perfect shot, aimed at the queen's head. But Scifi was faster. She twisted her body at the last second, the bullet grazing her helmet. She let out a sharp hiss and lunged again, her blade flashing. Grant barely had time to react. He rolled back, grabbing a discarded combat knife from the ground. It was laughably small compared to her weapon, but it was not about size. It was about skill. He needed to get close. Zurath swung her blade downward. Grant dodged to the side, the weapon slamming into the ground inches from him, sending up a cloud of dust. In that split second, he moved in. He dashed forward, slashing his knife across her armor. A weak spot near the ribs. The blade scraped against the exosuit, leaving a small cut, but it was enough. The queen growled in surprise. No one had ever touched her in battle before. She lashed out with her arm, striking Grant hard across the chest. He was sent flying, crashing into a pile of rubble. Pain exploded through his ribs, but he gritted his teeth and forced himself to stand. Zurath tilted her head. "Impressive," she admitted. "You are not as weak as I thought." Grant wiped blood from his mouth. "You're not as invincible as you thought," he shot back. For the first time in her life, the queen laughed. It was not a mocking laugh, not like before. It was something different, something that made her warriors shift uncomfortably. She was enjoying this fight, but amusement would not stop her. She dashed forward again, her speed almost blinding. Grant barely had time to react before she was upon him. He had one chance. At the last possible second, he dropped low, sliding between her legs, twisting his body. and flash. His knife found its mark. He drove the blade deep into the exposed joint between her armor plates, just beneath her shoulder. The queen let out a sharp hiss of pain, stumbling forward as the knife struck deep. She ripped it out, golden blood dripping from the wound. Her fingers curled around the hilt, her breathing heavier now. She stared at Grant with something new in her gaze. Respect. He had wounded her. No one had ever done that before. The battlefield remained silent. The Zirith warriors were shocked. The humans watched with hope. Zirathis held the knife in her hand, studying it. Then, slowly, she smiled. "You fight well, human," she admitted. "Perhaps better than any warrior I have faced." Grant exhaled, gripping his side. His body ached, but he refused to show weakness. "And you're not bad yourself," he said with a smirk. The queen laughed again, shaking her head. "Strange creatures, you humans." She turned to her warriors. "Stand down." Gasps echoed across the battlefield. The Zirith forces froze, uncertain. "My queen." General Salvik's voice crackled through the communicator. You cannot mean." Zirathis cut him off. "Enough blood has been spilled today." She turned back to Grant. "This war should have been simple, but your kind is not simple. You do not break, even when you should." Grant watched her carefully. "So what now?" A pause. Then the queen spoke. "Now," she said, "we talk." The battlefield remained frozen in stunned silence. Smoke still curled from burning wreckage, and the scent of battle lingered in the air. But no one moved. The queen had called for a truce. Zirith warriors glanced at one another, confused and uncertain. They had fought countless wars, conquered dozens of species, but never before had their queen halted a battle, especially not when victory was within reach. On the human side, soldiers gripped their weapons tightly, unsure if this was a trick. They had seen too much death, too much destruction, to believe that an enemy like the Zirith Dominion would simply stop. Commander Elias Grant, still standing despite his injuries, wiped sweat and blood from his brow. His breathing was heavy, his body ached, but his mind was sharp. He studied Queen Xirathis, searching for any sign of deception. She stood tall, her golden eyes locked onto his. The energy blade in her hand powered down, the humming sound fading into silence. "This war," she said, her voice carrying across the ruined city, "has proven something I did not expect." Grant crossed his arms, his tone cautious. "And what's that?" The queen tilted her head slightly. "You humans refused to surrender. You should have fallen, yet you stood. You should have broken, yet you fought harder." She stepped forward, and every human soldier tensed, their fingers tightening on their triggers. Grant lifted a hand, signaling them to hold. Zirathis continued, "Every species we have conquered has fallen the same way. They resist at first. When they realize the strength of the Dominion, they kneel. It is inevitable." She exhaled, glancing at the blood on her armor. Her blood. "But you are different. You do not kneel. You would rather die than live as slaves." Grant's jaw tightened. "You finally figured that out." Zirathis smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Yes." The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken tension. Then the queen made a decision that would change the course of history. She dropped her weapon. Gasps echoed from the Zirith soldiers. Some stepped forward in protest, but a single glare from their queen silenced them. The sound of the energy blade hitting the rubble was like a thunderclap in the still air. "I offer this truce not because we are weak," Zirathis declared, "but because I now understand that your people are not like the others." Grant studied her carefully. Was this real? Could he trust her? Sergeant Lewis stepped closer, whispering, "Sir, this could be a trap." Grant nodded slightly but didn't take his eyes off Zirathis. He had spent years fighting, years watching his people struggle against an empire that seemed unstoppable. And yet, here he was, facing the queen herself, who had just offered peace. If there was even a chance to end the war, he had to take it. Slowly, he reached for his sidearm. Every Zirith warrior tensed. Then, in a deliberate motion, Grant removed the magazine, cleared the chamber, and holstered the empty weapon. A show of trust. Zirith's eyes flickered with interest. "All right," Grant said. "Let's talk." A temporary alliance. An hour later, inside a half-destroyed human command post, the first meeting between humans and the Zirith Dominion took place. Zirithis stood at one side of a makeshift table, her elite guards standing nearby. Grant sat on the other side, flanked by his officers. Neither side trusted the other, but for the first time, they weren't killing each other. The Queen spoke first. "The Dominion does not fight wars for pleasure. We expand to ensure our empire's survival." Grant scoffed. "By enslaving entire civilizations." Zirithis didn't flinch. "By unifying them. Strength comes from order." Grant shook his head. "Strength comes from freedom." The Queen's gaze sharpened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she continued, "You must understand, your species was never meant to be more than another conquest. But now, I see that conquering humans is a waste of resources. You will never submit." Grant leaned forward. "So what do you want?" Zirithis hesitated for a moment before answering. "An enemy greater than you looms beyond the Dominion's borders." Grant frowned. "What enemy?" Zirithis' expression darkened. "A species even we fear, the Vrothar." Grant exchanged glances with his officers. They had never heard of the Vrothar. "They come from the edge of the galaxy," Zirithis explained. "They are different. We have fought them before. They do not conquer. They consume. If they reach this sector, they will not care about humans or Zirith. They will wipe us both out." Grant's mind raced. Was this the truth, or just another trick? Seeing his doubt, Zirithis added, "You have seen for yourself. I do not lie. The Vrothar will come. When they do, your people will stand alone, or we can stand together." A long silence followed. Then Grant leaned back, exhaling. "So that's why you're willing to make peace. You need us." The Queen smiled slightly. "Yes, and whether you admit it or not, you will need us too." Grant ran a hand through his hair. His entire life had been spent fighting the Zirith. The idea of working with them was unthinkable. And yet, if the Queen was telling the truth, then the real war hadn't even begun. Grant finally spoke. "We'll need proof. We don't trust you." Zirithis nodded. "Then allow me to show you." The war between humans and the Zirath was over. But a greater war was coming. And this time, they would have to fight it together. A cold wind howled through the ruined city as Commander Elias Grant and Queen Zirithis stood side by side, staring at the star-filled sky above. The battlefield, once soaked in blood and fire, was now eerily silent. The war between humans and the Zirith Dominion had ended, not in total victory, not in surrender, but in something far more unexpected. An alliance. Yet there was no celebration, no relief, because the true war had not even begun. Zirithis turned to Grant, her golden eyes filled with a rare emotion. Concern. "I assume you will need to convince your leaders," she said. Grant let out a dry chuckle. "Yeah, they're not going to like this." He glanced at her. "And what about yours?" The Queen exhaled. "The generals will be difficult to persuade. Some may even seek to challenge my decision." She straightened her posture. "But they will obey, or they will be removed." There was no arrogance in her tone, only certainty. Grant studied her for a moment. He had spent his whole life fighting the Zirith, thinking they were nothing more than brutal conquerors. But now, standing beside their queen, he saw something different. She was not a mindless tyrant. She was a ruler who carried the weight of her empire, just as he carried the burden of his people. And now, they shared a single, terrifying enemy, the Vrothar. Grant adjusted his rifle strap. "You said you'd show us proof." Xerathus nodded. Follow me. The truth in the stars. An hour later, aboard the Xerath flagship, Grant and his officers stood inside a massive command chamber. The walls were lined with glowing alien symbols, and a large holographic display flickered to life in front of them. Xerathus raised a clawed hand, and the hologram shifted, showing a distant star system on the outskirts of the galaxy. This was the planet Dravak 7, she said, one of our colony worlds. The humans watched as the display zoomed in, showing a thriving Xerath city, towering spires, massive warships, bustling streets filled with life. Then suddenly, darkness spread across the planet like a plague. Grant's breath caught in his throat. The city didn't just burn, it didn't just collapse. It was being consumed. Strange, shadow-like creatures poured across the land, devouring everything in their path. Their bodies twisted and pulsed as they moved, as if they weren't entirely real, more like living nightmares. The Xerath warriors fought back. Warships fired, soldiers unleashed plasma cannons, entire cities detonated in nuclear fire, but nothing stopped them. Within 3 days, the planet was gone. Not conquered, erased. Xerathus turned to Grant, her voice grim. This is what we face. Silence filled the chamber. The human officers exchanged uneasy glances. They had fought wars before. They had seen death, destruction, entire cities wiped off the map. But this was something far worse. Grant finally spoke. How do we stop them? The Queen's expression hardened. We don't know. That is why I need your kind. Grant frowned. Why us? Xerathus studied him carefully. Because you are different from every species we have encountered. Others surrender when faced with an unstoppable force. But humans, she narrowed her eyes. You fight, even when you should not. Grant thought back to the battles he had fought, the friends he had lost. He thought about Earth, his home. She was right. Humans didn't know when to quit. Grant turned to his officers. Get me a secure line to High Command. We need to talk to Earth. One of his men hesitated. Sir, what if they refuse? Grant's eyes darkened. Then we remind them what's at stake. The first step toward war. A few hours later, a secure transmission was sent to the highest levels of the United Earth Federation. Grant stood in front of the communication terminal, Xerathus beside him, as the holographic image of Admiral Thomas Whittaker flickered to life. The old admiral's face was lined with scars, his expression grim. Commander Grant, Whittaker said, I expected a report on the battle, not a Xerath queen standing next to you. Grant took a deep breath. Sir, the war with the Xerath is over. We have a bigger problem. Whittaker's eyes narrowed. Explain. Grant stepped forward. We've been preparing for the wrong war. The real enemy isn't the Dominion. It's something far worse. He turned to Xerathus. She didn't hesitate. With a single motion, she activated the recording of Dravak 7's destruction. The Admiral watched in silence. When the transmission ended, he didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he exhaled. God help us. Grant's voice was firm. Sir, we can't do this alone. We need to work with them. He gestured to Xerathus. And they need us. Whittaker's expression hardened. This will not be an easy alliance. Grant nodded. No, sir. But it's the only chance we have. A long silence followed. Then finally, Whittaker spoke the words that would change history. Very well, Commander. Prepare for negotiations. Grant turned to Xerathus. She gave a slow, approving nod. The war between humans and the Xerath had ended. A new war was about to begin. But this time, they would fight it together.